Hi, my name is Delphine. I buried my husband, and at his funeral, my son leaned in and whispered, "You're next." But it wasn't just grief that came after. It was paperwork I never signed, guests I never invited, and a will that somehow erased me while I was still alive. They said I was confused, emotional, maybe even unstable. But what if the truth is, they were planning my disappearance all along? How does a woman survive being erased by her own child? And what do you do when the people who say they love you are quietly stealing everything you've built? Stay with me, because this story doesn't end in silence. The moment I stepped into the church, I felt that faint pull of something wrong, like when you walk into a room and know the conversation stopped just for you. The air smelled of lilies and old wood, thick with that particular silence only grief or deep avoidance could produce. I clutched my small black purse, stepped forward slowly, and looked around for someone, anyone, who might meet my eyes. There was no one. The glossy funeral program in the usher's hand was what hit first. He offered it politely, not meeting my gaze. On the front, a dignified photo of Eldon stared out in sepia tones. Beneath it, a life of legacy, celebrated by his son, Lyle Whitman. No mention of a wife, not even a beloved family, just Lyle. When I found my seat, it wasn't in the front row. That row was filled Lyle, his wife Elowen, two of her sisters, and a neighbor who once asked me if I was the housekeeper. The usher guided me to the third row, behind a floral arrangement so tall I could barely see the casket. My knees bent automatically, but my spine stayed stiff. If grief had posture, mine was armor. The lights dimmed, and a slideshow began. Soft piano music hummed through the sanctuary. Photos faded in and out, Eldon as a child, Eldon in Vietnam, Eldon fishing with Lyle, Eldon at Lyle's graduation, Eldon at Lyle's wedding, Eldon holding Lyle's daughter, a legacy of father and son. I waited for our trip to New Mexico, our 25th anniversary in Maine. That weekend we tiled the kitchen ourselves, laughing at our crooked lines. But they never came. The video I'd worked on for 3 nights straight, gone. Instead, a sleek montage, polished and professional, told a version of Eldon's life where I had never existed. Behind me, someone whispered, "Didn't he have a wife?" Another voice, unsure, replied, "I thought he did." Maybe she passed first. I swallowed. My palms were damp, my heart beat not with mourning, but with the dull throb of disappearing. During the musical interlude, a gospel singer pouring her soul into "His Eye is on the Sparrow," I stood and walked carefully down the side aisle. Lyle stood by the pulpit, arms folded. "Lyle," I whispered when I reached him. "Why wasn't the video used?" He didn't look at me. His lips barely moved. People don't need to see what's already forgotten. Ramona, my oldest friend, rose from her seat to join me, but an usher stepped between us. "Ma'am," he said to her firmly, "please return to your seat." I stared at my son, waiting for a twitch of remorse, an explanation. He offered none. When Lyle stood at the pulpit to give the eulogy, he smiled to the crowd like a man at a charity gala. He spoke of a self-made man, a father who built his life brick by brick. Eldon Whitman, he said, was a man who stood alone. And now, he leaves a legacy I will carry alone. There was a pause. Then, his eyes found mine. Some inherit the house, some inherit the name, some fade. That's how nature works. A few people chuckled awkwardly. Ramona shook her head, her lips pressed tight. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. After the ceremony, we gathered at the gravesite. I stood alone near the edge, just beyond the tent's shade, as the casket was lowered into the earth. My heels sank into the grass. Lyle stepped behind me. I felt his breath before I heard the words. "You're next," he said, a hiss laced with satisfaction. "You'll be in that hole soon, and I'll make sure you vanish completely." I turned to face him, but he was already walking back toward the others, embracing relatives, smiling for photos with floral sprays in the background. One mourner, a nurse from the hospice, had seen it. Her eyes caught mine. She looked away. Back in my car, I sat in the driver's seat, unmoving. The engine was off, but I heard the ticking of the cooling metal, the sigh of the air vent stilling. My fingers trembled against the steering wheel. I could see him through the windshield, Lyle, laughing with Elowen, shaking hands with donors and board members. Grief fit him like a tailored suit. His words repeated in my head, a slow, looping echo. "You're next. You'll vanish." My hand reached for my purse. I pulled out my phone, tapped to open the recording app. I hesitated only once. Then I pressed the red button. The living room was silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint clicking of my fingernail against my teacup. My laptop sat open on the coffee table, paused at a still frame of Lyle's eulogy. His hand was midair, his eyes cast downward, his mouth half-formed in a smile that never reached his eyes. I hit play again. A legacy I will carry alone. Click. Rewind. Play again. The smile stayed forced each time. Too symmetrical. Too wide. As if he'd practiced in front of a mirror. And then there it was barely perceptible, but undeniable. When he stepped down from the podium, his eyes flicked toward me. A glimmer of something not sorrow, not reverence, but victory. I paused the video, took a deep breath. Then I opened the small leather-bound journal I kept hidden behind the spice rack and wrote it down. Forced smile. "You're next." Victory in the eyes. Underneath, I added the date and time. Evidence, or at least a breadcrumb. Something to hold on to in the sea of silence that had swallowed my home. The phone rang at 8:12 the next morning. I didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. Something told me I should... Delphine. "It's Gerald Kenley," the voice said. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since Eldon retired from the hospital board. "I'm so sorry about Eldon," he continued. "I wasn't able to attend, but I watched the stream. You held yourself with grace." I murmured a thank you, unsure what else to say. "There's something you need to know," he added. "It may be nothing, or it may not." I sat up straighter. "Last week," he said slowly, "someone requested access to Eldon's medical file, said it was for internal review, but it wasn't someone from our system." He paused. "His records, the ones from the last 6 months, are gone." My heart didn't race. It froze. I gripped the phone tighter. "Gone," I whispered. "Vanished. No backups. No audit trail," he said. And Delphine, someone high up, would have had to approve that deletion. I thanked him, or at least tried. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. After we hung up, I just sat there, staring at the carpet. My hand shook until I placed it flat on my lap. Ramona came by that afternoon with a plastic-wrapped bouquet, the same one she'd tried to place at the church. "They wouldn't let me in," she said, eyes flashing. Said the seating list was full, but I saw empty chairs. Plenty. She sat beside me on the sofa, her hand warm over mine. I saw Lyle whispering to the event coordinator. After that, things changed. Ramona wasn't one for drama. She was the kind of friend who read the fine print, remembered birthdays, and always had ginger mints in her bag. If she said something was off, it was, "They didn't just forget you," she said quietly. "They erased you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Later, I went into Eldon's office. I hadn't touched anything since he passed not the books, not the old rocking chair where he'd read the Post and Courier every morning, but now I needed answers. I opened drawers slowly, methodically. Old receipts, spare reading glasses, his handwriting on the corners of napkins, reminders to call someone, lists for hardware store runs. But the drawer I needed was the one on the bottom right, the one that always held the big things directives, legal forms, power of attorney copies. It was locked, and the key had always been on Eldon's ring. The ring I hadn't seen since the hospice nurse handed me his personal items in a brown paper bag, and in that bag, no ring. I stood in the middle of the room, suddenly aware of every breath I took. Lyle had hugged me with both arms after Eldon died. I remembered now his hands brushing my coat pocket as he held me. He'd murmured something then, something I hadn't registered. Let me help carry this. Was it the ring? That evening, as I debated whether to make dinner or just pour cereal into a bowl, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lyle, holding sunflowers. Of all things, Eldon had hay fever. I almost laughed. "Mom," he said, with a smile too big for his face. "I figured you could use some brightness." He stepped in without waiting for an invitation. "I saw Ramona's car here earlier," he said, placing the flowers in a vase like he lived here. "She means well, but she can be a little dramatic. Can't she?" I didn't answer. He came closer, touched my shoulder gently. "You look tired at the funeral. People are worried. Maybe take it easy for a while." I met his gaze. His eyes held the same glint I'd seen on the video, not concern, but calculation. I smiled soft, practiced. "You're right," I said. "Maybe I should rest." But inside, I wasn't resting. I was watching, and I was remembering everything. I had avoided Eldon's study like a haunted room. It wasn't fear of ghosts, it was the weight of his absence. The door was always slightly ajar, as though he'd just stepped out for a moment. But tonight, I opened it wide. The air smelled like him pipe tobacco. Lemon polish, the faintest touch of old paper. His favorite plaid chair still bore the indentation of his reading posture. Dust clung gently to the spines of worn books. And then, in the middle drawer of his desk, I found it a leather-bound journal I didn't recognize. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense. Each entry was addressed to me. Del. They began short for Delphine, only he called me that. They weren't love letters, exactly. More like truths he couldn't say aloud. Apologies. Regrets. Fragments of a man who kept too much inside. One entry stopped me cold. Dated a month before his stroke. "If something happens to me, protect yourself from our son." I read it twice. Then a third time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something else. Eldon, proud, dignified, endlessly patient, had been afraid of Lyle, and he never told me. He never told me. The words blurred behind tears. I'd always chalked up their tension to generational clash, to Eldon's stubborn pride or Lyle's perfectionism. But no, there had been fear, and I had missed it. I sat in that chair until my legs tingled, the journal heavy on my lap. Then came the memories, ones I had boxed away with mental padding, labeled not important, just stress. Lyle had a hard week. Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. Eldon had carved the turkey a little too slowly. His hands trembled a tremor that would later be diagnosed as early Parkinson's. Lyle snapped, "You can barely sign your name right, old man." Guests laughed nervously. Eldon chuckled, waved it off. And I poured more wine, changed the subject. What kind of wife does that? What kind of mother? Another memory rose, darker. It was during tax season. Eldon and Lyle had argued something about a financial decision. I hadn't caught the details. What I remembered was the sound, a thud. Eldon groaning. I ran in and found him on the floor. He slipped. Lyle said quickly. Eldon nodded, avoiding my eyes. Later, in bed. Eldon whispered, "Promise me never call the police on him. He's still our son." He had bruised ribs for weeks. I told myself I believed the story. I stood, numb, and approached the locked drawer in the corner. It had been locked for as long as I remembered. Eldon said it held old lecture notes. But the key, I'd forgotten he kept it tucked in a cufflink box. Click. Inside, among yellowed papers and receipts, lay a printed email thread. Subject line, about the will. The first message was Eldon's polite, firm, declining to make any changes. Lyle's reply was curt, angry. "If you don't make the update, don't blame me for what happens next." The email was dated 2 weeks before Eldon's stroke. The study felt colder now. Or maybe it was me. The envelope was thick, the paper smooth, the kind reserved for law offices and verdicts. I held it in my lap for 10 minutes before I dared to open it. Charleston's sun poured through the window, pooling over the polished wood of Eldon's old roll-top desk, now mine by default, or so I'd thought. Inside, the letter from the estate attorney was brief. Clinical and notification of property transfer review, listing legal beneficiaries. My name wasn't on it. 40 years in that house. And suddenly, I was a guest. I read the list again, then a third time. No mistake. Eldon had said, more than once, "We took care of the deed. It's all in both our names." I'd trusted him, of course I had. He was the one who handled the forms, who sat through the notary visits, who filed the taxes. My role was elsewhere, building a home, not securing its paper shell. I picked up the phone. The courthouse clerks knew me Delphine Shaw, former professor, not prone to melodrama. I asked politely, and the young man on the line said I could come in tomorrow morning to view the deed history. My hands were steady, but something in me had begun to tilt. The Charleston County office hadn't changed since the last time I was there, renewing my voter registration, a dusty building with too much air conditioning, and a mural of historic figures staring down from the lobby. A woman named Bethany brought me into the records room. "This is the full history," she said, laying down a folder. "Your address. Recent activity flagged because of the death." I opened the folder. The change of ownership document sat on top. It was dated just a month before Eldon died. The signature, supposedly his, looked off. Not forged, not obviously, just flat, as if it had been scanned, printed, and attached. I stared at it long enough that Bethany finally asked if I needed a copy. "Yes." I whispered, "Please." Ramona's voice over the phone was still breathy from her Sunday morning walk. "You remember how I said I was turned away?" "Yes." Well, I lied. Not entirely. I wasn't just turned away. I saw something. I stayed silent. I went around back, trying to talk to the event coordinator. That's when I saw a printed guest list. Delphine. Your name was on it. Crossed out. In pen. Pen. Yes. Not a printing error. Someone made that decision. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. My mouth was too dry to speak. And mine, I asked after a moment. Mine too. Crossed out. But yours. Yours looked like someone meant to erase you. Entirely. The next day, I walked into the church office, a box of pastries in hand, wearing my best cardigan and my professor's voice. "Hi." I was hoping to thank the coordinator from the funeral, I said. The secretary, a young woman named Claire, looked startled. "Oh, yes. Mr. Lyle's team handled most of it." Of course. I said gently. I'm just tying up loose ends. She left briefly and returned with a thin file folder. I asked if I could see the final guest list. She hesitated, then flipped to the page. There it was. A yellow post-it attached to the upper corner read, "She's not needed. Confirmed." Ramona's name crossed out. Mine not there at all. Not even as a mistake. Just gone. I smiled at Claire. Would you mind if I took a quick photo for my records? She blinked, unsure. But I was already raising my phone. Thank you, I said, and left before she could protest. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of 2 strong tea and a manila folder. Inside, I placed the deed copy, the guest list photo, the email printouts I'd saved from Eldon's study. I wrote on the folder, Truth, Part Y. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt something sharper than pain, clearer than grief. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was movement. The phone rang just past 10. I almost didn't pick up. But when I saw Lyle's name, I pressed answer. Mom, he said, voice smooth as ever. Just checking on you. You looked off. People were concerned. I'm holding up better than you'd think, I said. A pause. Then, glad to hear it. I hung up first. My hands didn't shake. The knock came just after lunch. 3 firm raps, not impatient, not uncertain. When I opened the door, a courier handed me a thick manila envelope from a local law office. I closed the door with it still sealed in my hands, the return label burning my fingertips. I sat at the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun catching the edge of the envelope, making it shine. I peeled it open like it might explode. Inside a petition for emergency guardianship, filed by Lyle Whitman, my son. The language was clean, cold, clinical erratic behavior, post-grief, social withdrawal, possible signs of cognitive decline. It cited my inability to manage household affairs and the disruptive confrontation at a public ceremony, meaning, of course, the funeral. There was a court date, 2 weeks from today. My stomach turned. I folded the papers back into the envelope like hiding them might undo them. But they stayed. So I called my lawyer. Then again. And again. Voicemail each time. The kitchen, once the heart of our home, now felt sterile, like a waiting room. The walls leaned in. My hands started shaking. Am I losing my mind? I whispered into the silence. I must have sat there for hours. The sun dipped below the window, casting a soft blue hue across the counters. The envelope sat like a bomb between my teacup and an empty notepad. The front door creaked open. I'd forgotten to lock it. Ramona's voice called softly. Delphine. You here in the kitchen? I managed. She walked in, holding a plastic grocery bag and something wrapped in a white cloth. I brought lentil soup. Figured you wouldn't cook. Then she unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a photo frame, our wedding photo. Eldon in a navy suit. Me in pale blue, holding sunflowers. The frame was cracked at the corner, the glass missing. One of the caterers handed this to me. Ramona said it was found in the trash bin behind the service tent. Someone threw it out. She placed it in my hands. The edges were chipped, but it was ours. For a second, I couldn't speak. I traced the broken wood, then the photo itself. Eldon looked so proud. Ramona touched my shoulder. Who throws out a wedding photo? Del, I think I'm starting to understand, I said softly. And I think Eldon did, too. That night, after Ramona left, I sat with the photo in my lap. I turned it over, checking the back for scratches. And there taped behind the cardboard backing was a small envelope. My name written in Eldon's unmistakable hand, Del. My breath caught. I peeled back the tape and opened it carefully. Inside a brass key and a folded piece of paper, the note, written in the same script, read, "In case they try to silence you, start here. You'll know where it fits." No signature. Just that. I stared at the key. It was small, ridged, old-fashioned. I knew immediately where it belonged. The shed. The shed at the back of the yard had been Eldon's sanctuary, part workshop, part archive. He kept it locked always, told me it was for safety, though I never asked from what. He'd go out there sometimes for hours, tinkering, sorting, organizing. I hadn't entered it since he passed. I slipped on my coat, stepped into the cool air, and made my way through the backyard. The wind rustled the trees, and the motion lights clicked on as I reached the door. The lock was stiff, but the key slid in smoothly. Inside, the smell of oil, cedar, and time hit me. The walls were lined with labeled boxes, gardening tools, folders, and in the center, under a canvas sheet, was a gray fireproof safe. I knelt beside it, my hands trembling. The key was still warm in my palm. I looked up at the rafters above, half expecting Eldon's voice to echo from them. It didn't. But I whispered anyway. "I'm here. I found it." Then I reached forward and turned the key. The safe opened with a click that sounded louder than it should have in the quiet shed. I half expected some cinematic burst of smoke, but what met me was more disarming stillness. Inside, meticulously arranged, were 3 folders labeled in Eldon's handwriting, "Medical Estate." Letters. My fingers hesitated before touching them, as though they might vanish if I reached too quickly. I slid them out one by one, laid them across the workbench, and sat. The air smelled like oil and cedar and thyme. My hands trembled, but my eyes stayed dry. The folder marked medical was the first I opened. It held 2 sets of documents, one thick, yellowed at the edges. The original power of attorney forms we signed together 10 years ago. Eldon's signature was strong, clear, familiar. Then came another set, newer, different font, different paper stock. Eldon's name again, but the signature was stiff, as though copied or guided. I laid them side by side. The difference wasn't just technical, it was personal. One signature belonged to a man I knew, the other someone pretending to be him. A note was clipped to the newer file, Eldon's handwriting, quick and slanted. "If anything happens to me, and Lyle takes control, check these." He knew. He suspected. He tried to warn me. I sat back, the file trembling in my lap. It wasn't just a matter of grief now. This was theft. Preemptive. Calculated. I moved to the letters folder next. Inside were 6 envelopes, each unsealed, addressed to me. I pulled out the first. The date was almost a year ago. Dell. It began. "I'm trying to figure out how to talk to you about Lyle without sounding like I'm being paranoid. But something's wrong. He's not just pushing me about the will, he's pushing about everything. The house, our accounts, even my old board seat. He wants to fix the family name. I think that means erase the parts he doesn't like." I read the next, and the next, a progression of worry, frustration, fear, regret. The last one was barely a paragraph. "You were always the stronger one. Dell. Don't let him erase you." I folded them all back carefully. They didn't feel like pages. They felt like a rope being passed across time, one end in his hand, the other now in mine. The third folder was marked Estate, but inside was just a small envelope. Original will was scrawled across the front. I opened it and froze. The document inside was the will we'd drafted 5 years ago when Eldon was still healthy, still meticulous. It listed both our names as co-owners, me as executor, Lyle as a beneficiary, yes, but not a controller. But the will was torn, not shredded, torn into large, careful sections, then sewn back together with red thread. Someone had tried to destroy it, Mutoy, and then stopped. Who had sewn it? Why keep it? The thread was tight, precise, not Eldon's style, which meant someone else had found it. Someone else had known it mattered. I stared at it, at the red-like veins through the paper, and I knew this was my weapon, or my shield, or both. I didn't sleep that night. Back in the house, I scanned everything page by page, front and back, into a password-protected folder in the cloud. I uploaded copies to a second drive and mailed a USB stick the next morning to Marcy Keener, the best legal mind I knew and a former student of mine. Then I pulled out a fresh legal pad, witnesses, Ramona, the church coordinator, hospice nurse, documents, timeline, recording of Lyle's threat, items photo, letter, will. Each line I wrote steadied me, not because I had control, but because I had truth. I had what Eldon left me, and now I had a purpose. I slipped everything into a wide folder, thick as a novel, and took a permanent marker to the front. I wrote, if he tries again, start here. I underlined it twice. Then I tucked it beneath the floorboards of the hall closet, just behind the emergency lanterns. And I slept, finally, with the weight not lifted, but placed where it belonged. He showed up at 9:03 me. Uninvited as ever, but this time he didn't come alone. Through the peephole, I saw Lyle standing on my porch in a tailored gray jacket, holding a tray of coffee and flashing the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him stood a man I didn't recognize, older, neatly dressed, with a church pin on his lapel and a clipboard tucked under one arm. I opened the door slowly. "Mom," Lyle said smoothly, "this is Pastor Glenn. We just wanted to check in, make sure you're okay." I raised an eyebrow but stepped aside. "Of course," I said. "Come in." As they entered, I noticed Lyle subtly angle his phone upward, camera lens peeking out from under his wallet case. "Recording. Always recording. Some of the church members," he began, "have noticed you've been withdrawing, a little more anxious lately." Pastor Glenn nodded, smile polite but distant. "We've had concerns raised about your well-being, Mrs. Shaw." The coffee was a prop, the concern a script. I offered them seats but stood by the sideboard, adjusting the vase where the flowers Ramona brought me were just beginning to wilt. "I'm fine," I said. "Just grieving in peace." Lyle leaned forward. "Mom, we've noticed you've been telling people Dad left you everything. That's not true. It's creating confusion and concern." The pastor added. I nodded slowly. "I see." Under the sideboard. My own phone had been quietly recording since before I opened the door. After they left Lyle's hand lingering too long on my shoulder, the pastor murmuring something about resources for transition, I sat in the armchair and stared at the blank space where Eldon's picture used to hang. The silence was louder than their voices had been. That evening, I got the notification. A photo of my front porch, my home, had been posted to Lyle's public page. The caption read, "Pray for those who don't know they're suffering." He'd tagged several church members, community liaisons, and even the head of the neighborhood association. No name, no direct accusation, but the implication was clear. I stared at the post for a long time, my fingers curled around the edge of my phone, not from fear, just from fury so quiet it hummed. He wanted the public to see me as a problem before I could show them the truth. 2 days later, I received a letter from the probate office. Lyle had filed a new version of Eldon's will. This version stated that Eldon had revoked all previous documents and created a new trust in Lyle's name, excluding me entirely. I read through it line by line. The font was different. The language stilted. Eldon would never have called me the former spouse. But it was the signature that struck hardest. Thin. Digitally clean. Too perfect. I looked at the notary line, signed by someone named Candace Hollister. I Googled her. She'd moved to Oregon 2 years ago. When Ramona came over that evening, I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her eyes narrowing as I laid out the documents. Then, without saying a word, she stood, walked to her purse, and pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. She scrolled quickly. "I have the photo from when Eldon signed the will, at my kitchen table, with my blue check tablecloth in the background. He even used my reading glasses." She found the image and held it out. There it was. Eldon's hand, the pen, the document, and Ramona's unmistakable kitchen behind him. Her caption when she posted it read, "If lies get you ahead." I hope the fall is steep. Within an hour. It was shared a dozen times. Within a day. Nearly 200. People began messaging me. Neighbors, old colleagues, even a few from church. Delphine. One wrote, "I didn't know. I'm so sorry." I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I took the original will, the forged copy, and Ramona's photo, and I placed them side by side on my dining table, not as weapons, as proof. I arrived at the courthouse before the doors were even unlocked. The street still held the breath of morning, that cool hush just before Charleston stirs to life. I wore navy the same shade Eldon always said made me look serious, but still kind. It felt appropriate. Ramona met me on the steps with 2 cups of coffee. No words, just the nod of someone who knew when silence was enough. We sat together until Marcy arrived, briefcase in hand, coat crisp, her energy calm but razor-edged. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded once. Lyle's lawyer went first. He stood with his hands clasped gently before him, his voice as smooth as butter in a southern kitchen. "We are here out of concern, not conflict," he began. "Concern for a woman we deeply respect, who has shown signs of decline following the devastating loss of her husband." He let the word decline hang in the air. He spoke of my increasing isolation, my distrust of family, and preoccupation with estate documents and imagined threats. He cited my lack of attendance at social functions, my avoidance of phone calls. He offered a medical report from an unnamed physician, unsigned, referencing mild paranoia, elevated anxiety. I said nothing. Marcy took notes. Ramona's fingers tapped rhythmically on her cup. Then Lyle took the stand. He started, soft eyes lowered, voice careful. "This isn't easy," he said. "No son wants to do this." He spoke of the funeral, my supposed outburst, how I'd accused people of conspiracy. He mentioned the state of the house, saying he'd found rotting fruit in the kitchen. I had thrown one bad apple away the day before. "She talks to herself," he added. "Long conversations. I heard them." He glanced toward the audience, waited for the sympathy to settle. It didn't. When it was my turn, I didn't look at Lyle. I sat with my back straight and my folder in my lap. Marcy stepped aside. "Miss Shaw," the judge prompted. I took a breath. "In the last 2 weeks," I said calmly, "I have organized funeral arrangements, handled estate documentation, communicated with lawyers, and received concerning threats to my autonomy. I opened the folder. These are scanned emails between my husband and my son. Here are the original and forged versions of power of attorney. This is the signature page of a revised will submitted by Mr. Lyle Whitman, notarized by a woman who moved out of state 2 years before it was signed. I handed copies to the clerk. And here, I said last, is a note my husband wrote in his own hand. I read it aloud. You were always the stronger one. Del, don't let him erase you. Silence. Even the judge blinked slowly. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, squinting at the documents. He looked at Lyle's attorney. This medical report, he said, is unsigned. There is no diagnostic provider, no formal exam. Why was it submitted? Lyle's lawyer began to speak, but the judge cut him off. I'm delaying my decision until a full document review is completed. This court will reconvene in 10 business days. In the meantime, no guardianship rights will be transferred. He struck the gavel lightly. Lyle stood so fast his chair nearly tipped. He didn't look at me as he left. His jaw clenched, shoulders tight, phone already in his hand. He didn't win. Not today. Outside the courtroom, Ramona slipped her arm around my back. You didn't even raise your voice, she whispered. I smiled. I didn't have to. I said, truth has its own echo. The envelope from the courthouse was slim, almost too slim to carry something meaningful. I opened it slowly at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd cried 2 weeks earlier, hands trembling over Lyle's guardianship petition. This time, I didn't cry. Your capacity is not in question. The judge's letter read, no guardianship is granted, no apology, no elaboration, just those words, clear and final. I set the letter down. There was no celebration, no champagne or victorious music swelling in the background, just the hum of the refrigerator and the way the light slanted across the tile. But I breathed. A breath I hadn't taken in months, the kind that reaches your ribs, fills your back, and tells your nervous system it's safe again. That Sunday, I went to church. I didn't wear black. The whispers started before I reached the sanctuary doors. Some women in pearls tilted their heads together. One of the deacons glanced at me, then looked quickly away. Inside, the air smelled of hymnals and pine polish, the same pews, the same wooden cross, but the atmosphere had changed. I sat 2 rows from the back, not because I had to, because I chose to. During the welcome portion, one couple nodded toward me. Another woman gave me a faint smile. Last week, they wouldn't meet my eyes. This week, they offered a sliver of acknowledgement. Lyle wasn't there. The sermon was about dignity. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. On Tuesday, I ran to the store for milk. I hadn't expected to see anyone. But the clerk, a boy with a wispy mustache and nervous energy, paused mid-scan when he looked at me. I saw the video, he said softly. I blinked. Excuse me, the courtroom clip, the one with you and the note from your husband. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Just bagged the milk and eggs and nodded. I walked to my car in silence, opened my phone, and typed Ramona's name into Facebook. There it was, a cropped clip of me reading Eldon's final letter. The caption, "Truth doesn't shout." It stands. Nearly 18,000 views. Below it, dozens of comments. Some cruel, most not. Shame on that son. She reminds me of my own mother. Grace under fire. Don't mess with women who raised children and buried husbands. Later that day, an email from my former university pinged into my inbox. Subject honoring Eldon Shaw, a legacy restored. The message was simple. The English department, in partnership with the Alumni Association, wanted to name the main lecture hall after Eldon. They invited me to speak at the dedication ceremony next month. They called him a man of principle and a quiet architect of generations of students. And then we'd be honored if his wife, Professor Delphine Shaw, would speak on his behalf. I stared at the screen until the text blurred. Then I closed the laptop. I didn't cry, but I did whisper, "Thank you." That night, my voicemail lit up. Lyle's voice was calm, clipped. "You think this is over? It's not. You still live in the house Dad built. That house will never belong to you." He hung up without waiting for a reply. I didn't delete the message. I opened my folder marked "If he tries again" and added the transcription to the back. I didn't reply. But I did say aloud, "Let him come. Later." I sat in Eldon's old chair, the one with the faded arms and the squeaky tilt. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't play music. I just listened to the quiet. For the first time in months, it didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. The walls didn't close in. The house didn't hum with fear. I closed my eyes and said to the dark, "He may have tried to erase me, but I'm still here." The knock came on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was steeping tea. It wasn't Lyle or Ramona or even the postman. It was a young woman, barely 30, with wind-tangled hair and a press badge clipped to her sweater. "I'm Leah Hoffman," she said, local affairs reporter for the Post and Courier. "We're doing a piece on elder guardianship abuse, especially how it intersects with estate manipulation. I was hoping you'd be willing to talk." I started to shake my head, but she added quickly, "We've already interviewed your son." Of course, I didn't let her in, but I didn't close the door either. I simply said, "I'll send you something," and then I did. The next day, I recorded an audio message using the microphone Eldon gave me years ago when I'd tried to start a podcast for retired professors. I never published a single episode until now. My voice was calm. "I am not angry." I said, "I am awake." I didn't name names. I didn't offer accusations. Instead, I laid out the facts, timelines, documents, the power of attorney switch, the will forgery, the court's ruling. "I tell you this not for sympathy," I said, "but because there are others like me, women who stayed quiet because we were taught that dignity lives in silence. But sometimes, dignity lives in exposure." I emailed the file to Leah. She didn't respond immediately. But the next morning, it aired on their community podcast. By noon, it had 22,000 plays. 2 days later, one of Lyle's clients pulled out of a major partnership. The financial firm he'd built with such pride, based as much on charisma as credentials, was suddenly on shaky ground. I didn't look for the fallout, but it found me. His name was quietly removed from the Chamber of Commerce directory. An old video surfaced taken at Eldon's funeral, Lyle whispering to the event coordinator. Someone had caught the words, "She's not needed," confirmed. The internet did what it always does. It remembered. The same people who once praised Lyle's leadership now paused, uncertain. The foundation of his empire wasn't crumbling. It was being peeled away. Marcy called to confirm that the court had accepted Eldon's original will, and the newer one filed by Lyle had been invalidated. The language used was reversion to previous legally witnessed document. The house remained in my name. The trust fund previously rerouted by Lyle was now frozen. Pending further review, I received a court order stating that all documents and personal items taken from Eldon's study were to be returned within 10 business days. A list was attached. Eldon's cufflinks, his journal, even the old pocket watch he kept on the dresser. For the first time in months, I felt like the law recognized that I existed. The letter arrived 3 days later. It was handwritten, the script slanted and looping, the name signed at the bottom, Catherine Morales. She'd been one of my students 20 years ago, struggled with her thesis, had a quiet strength, but little confidence. "I heard your voice on the podcast," she wrote. "I just left an abusive marriage. I thought no one would believe me either, until you said, 'Dignity lives in exposure.' You saved a stranger. Thank you. I held the letter in both hands for a long time, not as proof of victory, but as a reminder that truth travels, even when whispered. That evening, I lit the fireplace and walked through my house, the one Eldon and I built, room by room, year by year. I took his old watch from the box and placed it on the mantel, beside our wedding photo, not to mourn, to honor. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "This house remembers me. That's enough." The box had sat in the corner of my closet for months, unopened, untouched. It was the last of Eldon's things I hadn't gone through. Everything else had found a place, his coats given away, his books reshelved, his desk now holding my own notebooks. But the box remained, like an unopened question. One Saturday morning, when the chill in the air no longer felt like something to fight, I pulled it out. Inside, his cufflinks lay tucked into a velvet pouch, his journals, 3 of them, tied together with a frayed string, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a wool scarf, a cassette tape labeled in his handwriting, February for D. I sat on the floor for a long time, just holding it. It took me a while to find the old cassette player. I had stored it years ago in the hall closet, buried under blankets and a box of holiday ornaments. When I pressed play, the motor wheezed softly, then steadied. Eldon's voice filled the room, soft and measured. "Del, if you're hearing this, then I didn't say enough while I was here." There was a pause. "I want you to know. I saw what was happening. I saw how Lyle's ambition was no longer just about succeeding, it was about control. I let it go on too long. I thought love would be enough to correct it." He cleared his throat. "You deserved better protection." I didn't always say that, but I knew it. I feared what he'd become. I feared what he might do to you, too. His voice cracked. I should have stepped in sooner. Another pause. "I loved you, Del, through all of it. Even when we disagreed, even when I got too quiet, you were always the lighthouse. Del, keep standing." The tape clicked at the end, soft as a sigh. 3 days later, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. It was from Lyle. His handwriting hadn't changed since he was a teenager, slanted forward, rushed, like the words couldn't get out fast enough. "I don't know what to say to you anymore," it began. Maybe I never did. There was no apology, no explanation, just that one line of truth. He ended with, "I need time." I folded the letter and placed it with Eldon's journals. That, too, was part of the story now. Christmas morning came quietly. No tree, no family, just the house, wrapped in winter stillness. I set one plate at the table, next to a candle and a glass of Eldon's favorite red wine. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its glow flickering across the mantel. I didn't speak to the room. I simply poured the wine, raised my glass slightly, and whispered, "We're still here." Ramona arrived unannounced in the afternoon, holding a tin of homemade pie and a bag of vinyl records. "I figured you wouldn't want carolers," she said, "but you might want Sam Cooke." We sat on the couch, the music filling the spaces grief had left behind. She served pie, still warm, and we listened. "You're the strongest person I know," she said softly. I smiled. "I'm just someone who didn't vanish." That night, I walked to the edge of the garden where Eldon used to plant hydrangeas. The soil was cold beneath my shoes, the air crisp with the bite of December. The stars were quiet. So was the sea, far in the distance. I looked out at the darkness and whispered, "Goodbye, Eldon. I finally heard you." The envelope was lavender, the handwriting careful but unfamiliar. Inside was an invitation to Madison's spring recital. my granddaughter, who I hadn't seen in over a year. The date was scrawled in pencil, at the bottom, just one sentence. It would mean a lot to her. No signature. I turned it over in my hands, no RSVP card, just expectation. I placed the envelope in a drawer, not in anger, not as punishment, but in quiet self-protection. Some bridges aren't burned. They're gently lowered into the water and left to drift. 2 days later, I slipped a card into the mailbox, cream-colored with an embossed sunflower in the corner. Inside, I wrote, "Dear Madison, spring is a wonderful time to dance. I hope the music makes you feel brave and happy. Love, Delphine." Between the folded card, I placed a pressed daffodil from my garden. No return address, no instructions, just a gesture soft and untethered. Sometimes, love is letting go of what it used to look like. That week, I stood in front of 30 women at the public library for a local book club. The topic was memoir writing and survival. I wore my wedding ring on a chain around my neck, not for anyone to see, but so Eldon could be close without being center stage. I didn't tell them my whole story. I told them mine. I'm not here to name villains, I began, or to ask for your sympathy. They listened, still and upright. Sometimes, healing isn't returning to what hurt you. It's finding a place it can't reach. Afterwards, 3 women stayed behind. One hugged me. Another simply nodded, eyes wet. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about recipes, good pens, and how grief changes the taste of tea. In April, the frost melted. Ramona and I planted bulbs in Eldon's garden hyacinths, tulips, and my favorite freesia. "You don't look like a woman who lost," Ramona said, pulling weeds with gusto. I smiled, wiping dirt from my hands. That's because I didn't. We sat on the porch afterward, drinking lemonade from mismatched glasses. The sun fell soft against the roof, and birds hopped between branches as if the world had forgotten winter. That night, I pulled the microphone from the drawer. It still worked. I clicked record. "My name is Delphine Shaw," I said. I was a wife, a mother, and I survived both roles. I paused. Not for effect, for breath, for memory. This isn't for a podcast. It's for me. So I don't forget that I lived a life worth documenting. I didn't worry about editing. I just spoke. Later. I stood by the window. The breeze caught the edge of the curtains and made them dance. Just a little. Outside. The garden waited to bloom. The birds kept singing. And me, I smiled. He tried to bury me in silence, but I grew louder in the quiet. Sometimes life doesn't offer a grand closure wrapped in apologies or redemption. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is choose not to disappear, especially when others want us forgotten. If you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or doubted by the very people you once held close, I hope my story reminded you your voice still matters. You don't need permission to reclaim it. In the quiet, I found strength not through revenge, but through standing still when the world tried to shove me aside. And maybe that's something we don't say enough. Dignity is not silence. It's choosing when and how to speak for yourself. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight quietly for your place in the world, or maybe you've helped someone else stand tall again? Let me know in the comments. If this video touched something inside you, drop a 1 below or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't connect, be honest, tell me what didn't land for you. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that reflect real struggles, quiet power, and the everyday courage of people like you. Because your story, too, deserves to be heard. It's to be.